Driftworks, and this is my Promodet 964 Turbo. We're now a year on since I collected it from Japan and shipped it to the UK, and I've done a hell of a lot of stuff to it, so I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we've done. If you've watched the video of me collecting the car, and you'll know that there was some running issues, and I did about 1,000 kilometers in the car from Fukushima Prefecture right down to Osaka, where we loaded the car into a container. All that time we had this intermittent cutting out issue. A couple of times it left me stranded, unable to start the car, and I never got to the bottom of it despite help from some wonderful people. So one of the first things that I had to do when we dropped the car out of the container into our workshops here was start tracking down this running issue. I ended up replacing a whole load of parts. It was really difficult to pin down the problem. I dropped the tank, did filters. I ended up replacing the fuel pumps with 2 Bosch 044s. A load of new lines needed making up for that. The problem was still there. I ended up filming the fuel pressure regulator and going for a drive and waiting till it happened. And then the fuel pressure was dropping, but it's not a problem with the fuel pressure regulator. So then came wiring. I'd already had a quick check of this and didn't seem to see any serious issues, checked voltages, etc. But actually this intermittent fault over bumps and stuff, there was something wrong with the standard wiring in the car. I ended up running 2 new wires, new positives to each of the fuel pumps, new fuse and everything, and hey presto, the car works and runs and is reliable. As part of that process as well, I replaced the ignition amplifier, the module, with an MSD one, and one of the benefits of that at the same time was that I got to put this 2-step limiter button on it, which is really cool. One of the other problems with the car was it was overboosting, so when it was running properly and the fuel pumps were providing enough power and enough fuel, the boost would go up so high, I think it was reaching about 1.9 bar, and then it would fuel cut or boost cut, whatever the M4's Motec set for. So it had a HKS boost controller in it, which are great, but I really like the Turbo Smart eBoost too, and I happen to have one that I'd used on my S15 drift car, so I put that in, had to do a load of rewiring, replumbing for that, and again completely solved the overboosting issue. And that was getting it reliable, get it running again, and now it's time to get onto the fun stuff, the modifications and tweaks. So one of the first things I wanted to do to the car was improve the wheel fitment. It's quite unusual because people call this an RWB car, but actually it's a Promodet car, and all of the bodywork was done by Nakai-san at his workshop at Rauh-Welt. But the wheel fitment and everything was more Promodet style, which was sort of track use. It wasn't super flush, and I didn't want any contact with tyres, but I did want tyres to fit a little bit better in the arches and have a bit more of a kind of old school racing look about them. So I wanted to increase the tyre profile. So I used some Michelin Super Sports. I went up to 265 40/18 front and a 295 35/18 rear. I also lowered the suspension a little bit, the Zeal coilovers. As we're talking about the suspension on the car, one of the big things that I've done to it more recently is fit a set of the BBI CNC'd knuckles, which are an absolute work of art. There's a bit of a challenge for me fitting them to 964 Turbo. Some bits and pieces were different, sort of wheel bearing offset and some boring stuff like that, so I ended up having to make spacers that sit behind the brake discs to position the wheel correctly and everything, but those are absolutely superb. They've really sorted out the bump steer issues that were inherent with this really low 964. Once I'd fitted those knuckles, I came up against another issue, which was the corrected geometry meant that now my tyres at the front were too big and they were hitting where I'd already clearanced slightly with a hammer on the inside, and I'd kind of got my in and Nakai-san on, and I'd angle ground the outside of the arches just to sort of make it nice and smooth and have the clearance that I needed. Now it was contacting again, and I wasn't really comfortable with going any further with the hammer, so I decided that I'd drop it down to a slightly wider tyre, 275, but a smaller profile 35/18 tyre, and that is now absolutely perfect, and I think really helps with dropping that front bumper just ever so slightly to perfect the look of the tyre in the arch. So we talked a little bit about me sort of fettling the tyre fitment and the arches and having to like grind stuff back a little bit. But the overall look of the car was, for me, almost absolutely perfect. I just wanted to tweak a few other bits and pieces. So the rear wing position for me was ever so slightly goofy looking. So I ended up making some new carbon uprights for the car. Which sort of I'd spent a couple of days obsessing over using cardboard templates and making mock-ups and positioning it and getting the angle right. Really happy with that. I changed to some brand new rear lights with sort of a slightly redder tint film. I made a front number plate holder, which is out of my old 997 GT3, sort of cut that down and made that work. Painted the tired grills, all the black mesh stuff. Rear wiper delete. No sports car should ever have a rear wiper. So now the car's working and I'm actually driving it around, going to events and getting carried away with stuff as I do. We went to Shelsley Walsh and did some launches and had a little go up the hill climb there, which was absolutely brilliant. I think that the car was possibly parked up for a long time before I got it, before I brought it to the UK. We still don't know the actual full story of this car. Basically, I've got pictures of it being built, having the bodywork done at Rauh-Welt on the Rauh-Welt website, on their blog from back in the day in 2008, and I think there's a Speed Hunters article showing the car in the background being worked on, again sort of the 2008 era. But from that point on, can't find anything to do with the car. I'm not sure whether it was just parked up in somebody's garage. It's certainly mint enough, it's certainly sort of in good enough condition to perhaps have just been parked up. But obviously because I've started using it and I drive cars quite hard, we're seeing little things start to rear their heads. So we had an oil pipe to the dry sump system that was leaking slightly, repaired that. We still had a drip, it turned out to be the crank seal. So we pulled the gearbox off to have a look and investigate. It actually turned out to be the input shaft seal on the gearbox itself and the crank seal. And whilst repairing that, whilst the gearbox is off, I measured the clutch, which is a OS Geekin triple plate, and it was out of spec. It was quite worn. I decided to get a new rebuild kit from Japan through Stacked Ink. One of the other things that I didn't like about the car was it had a real tendency to one tyre fire, doing burnouts and launches and sort of getting a bit carried away. It used to spin up one wheel really badly, and then when the other one would bite, it would really try and spit you out. It gets quite dangerous. So I've used Guard LSDs in the past, GT Gear LSDs, for my 997 GT3. I really liked it, so I went for one of their Club Sport LSDs and loaded that into the gearbox before we rebuilt it. So that kind of almost brings us up to speed. About a month and a half ago, the car went to high caliber detailing to have the sills painted and the lower part of the rear quarters. They had to stay on the car because they're basically bonded on. Those were repainted, and then he completely detailed the car, ceramic coated everything, ceramic coated a brand new set of work Brombachers that I bought for the car, basically exactly the same spec with a slightly different centre colour. I was a little bit worried about this change of colour for the car because ultimately it was kind of pretty much perfect when I got it, but these tiny little tweaks that kind of make it my own, I've got to give it a go. So I wasn't entirely sure about that colour of the wheels, ended up really liking it. Still really like the other colour, the slightly yellower gold, but these are brand new. They don't have any curbing, they're completely polished, and they're well sealed against UK weather as well, which is essential over here. Let's have a look at the actual heart of it. You never get to see much in a Porsche. It's kind of crammed in there underneath, but Essentially, what we've got here is a Promodet built engine. Again, I don't know the full spec of it, but based on other stuff that people have found out, it'll just be a blueprinted engine with RSR cams and stuff like that. It's very laggy. It has a huge HKS turbo hiding somewhere down here. It's got normal traditional style throttle body and TPS sensor. It still runs a Dizzy and a single coil. It's on Motec M4 management. It's got custom made by Promodet and Greddy intercooler. Still got the aircon, essential. And there's obviously the awesome Promodet titanium manifolds that they hand form, which we'll show you in a minute when we're up on the ramp. So onto the interior. Now, a 964 is a pretty small place to be compared to my previous Porsches, the 9972 GT3 and the 991 GT3. They're quite big cars. This is tiny and I'm not tiny. So the driving position initially was quite awkward with the drive through Japan. It wasn't terrible. The seats are awesome. They're Recaro SPGs, sparkleback, but it was quite awkward. I was quite high. I was off center from the steering wheel, and combined with the weird pedals that you get in these older Porsches, it was not the most comfortable driving experience. So what I've done is I've made my own custom seat rails, which basically ram the seat as far as it can go over towards the tunnel, and it actually bolts through from the inside of the seat into a metal frame. That then gives me a perfectly in-line driving position. What I've also done is I've fitted a Nardi deep corn, one of my favourite steering wheels. Again, we're the distributor for Nardi, so we sell a lot of these, stole it off the shelf, and an NRG quick release, which is also quite handy. But yeah, the driving position for me now is as a 6'2", 6'3" guy in a very small car is absolutely spot on. Love it. The rest of the interior is just really clean and simple. It's in really good condition. And the only other thing I've got in here is my safe driving charm from Japan, which, you know, keep for good luck. So now we got it up on the lift, you can see the Promodet titanium headers manifold. The whole exhaust system is a work of art. You can see the hand-formed long tube headers. They go into a joiner here with the HKS turbo tucked up there, the HKS external wastegate here. And yeah, it's really nicely packaged, and it's such a shame that you don't really get to see this because the car's so low and it sits underneath it. But yeah, I know it's there and it's beautiful. Little known fact, and often confusing people, is the fact that this is the exhaust and this is a separate exhaust entirely for the external wastegate. So when it blows flames, it kind of does it separately, not at the same time. Zeal coilovers here. It's all a bit dirty because I've put a lot of protective spray all over it. But these are made by Endless with Swift springs. Quite a hard setup in my opinion, but works really well, and actually, even though it's stiff springs, it's still quite comfortable. With this absolutely huge turbo here and sort of the really peaky cams, it's like beyond lag I've ever experienced on anything before. It's possibly even worse than my S15 Silvia, which is about a 500 horsepower, 2-litre engine. But it does make for some interesting driving, that's for damn sure. And it makes a killer sound. So I think that about covers the technical details, so it's probably time we just go for a rip.
At Driftworks, we've helped over 50,000 happy customers since 2004. Our huge online parts store is simple to use, with superb shipping rates to anywhere in the world, and finance options available for UK customers. We live and breathe wheel fitment, so if you have any questions about your own car or any of our products before placing an order, please drop us an email at shop@driftworks.com or give us a call. Thanks for watching.